exit of Chris Alexander, the state's top official overseeing New York's rollout of adult-use marijuana sales, is seen by many as assigning blame for what has been described as the country's worst cannabis market launch to date. More than 3 years after New York legalized adult use, only 122 stores were open for business statewide, and the market's $123 million in 2023 sales were only about 1/4 of projections. But whether Alexander's departure as executive director of the State Office of Cannabis Management, the OCM, will mean a turnaround, or whether his replacement to be assigned by Governor Kathy Hochul upon completion of Alexander's term in September will be any better, it's far from clear, industry observers told MJ Biz Daily on Monday. Through rumors of Alexander's exit had been brewing for months, there are rumblings in state political and cannabis circles that Hochul was fishing for a scapegoat, and it will be some time before New York's adult use market fulfills its significant potential and ambitious social justice promises. In quotes, my concern is that Chris will be made a fall guy and the shortcomings of other developments. New York-based attorney David Holland, a partner at Prince & Lobel and executive director of the state's chapter of the National Organization, or NORML, former marijuana laws, in quotes says, I don't think that with the completion of his term and his departure that we'll see the end of some of the things vexing the program. Master of disaster, you ask? Well, Hochul was earlier this spring branded New York's attempt to launch regulated cannabis sales as a disaster. Asked Alexander on Friday to step down, the New York Times first reported the OCM did not respond to MJ Biz Daily's request for a comment, and that was the same day Hochul's administration released a blistering report criticizing the OCM's performance on Alexander's watch. Hochul claimed during a news conference that the report and Alexander's de facto firing was not about assigning blame, but the report compiled by the State Office of the state's Office of General Services faulted the OCM, among other things, a complex and obscure licensing process that, along with sparse customer service, often kept marijuana businesses' license applicants in the dark for months or longer. But there's an untapped potential, you guys, because faced with such uncertainty, many would-be retail operators ditched the commercial leases rather than pay rent for storefronts for a year or longer, without knowing when or if they'd be able to open a marijuana store. The OCM also had an unspent budget surplus of $26 million and 65 unfulfilled staff positions, the report found. However, observers of New York politics noted that it's unclear whether the OCM or other department was responsible for failing to complete the hirings or spend their money. In a series of posts Friday on Twitter, formerly known or now known as X, a former OCM staffer said early warnings about bureaucratic problems went unheeded by the Office of General Services, the same agency that compiled the report for the governor's office. And the OCM was only one of several state agencies responsible for rolling out regulated marijuana sales in New York, and those departments were capriciously absent from the Hochul-ordered OGS report, according to Obzert Orunda, and the CEO and founder of the Cannabis Place, a licensed retailer in Queens, in quotes, says, when we talk about what were the problems with the OCM, they're in the pool trying to stay afloat, but someone else is making the waves, he told MJ Biz Daily. And last but not least, as far as the origin of failure, you guys, New York legalized adult use cannabis in March 2021 under a bill signed into law by then Governor Andrew Cuomo, who resigned amidst scandal shortly thereafter, and Hochul, who stepped up from the lieutenant governor position to replace Cuomo, appointed Alexander as the OCM's executive director in September of 2021. Alexander had a heavy hand in writing the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act passed by the legislature, and it was under his direction that OCM launched the much criticized conditional adult use retail dispensary, better known as the CURD program. The CURD program guaranteed that the first marijuana stores to open would be owned and operated by applicants who could demonstrate harm caused by the war on drugs, and that angered the state's so-called registered organizations, most of which are well-known marijuana multi-state operators that already held New York medical marijuana business license. The MSOs still are not selling adult-use cannabis products, and if it was MSOs that filed one of several lawsuits challenging the OCM's decision to let other entrants into the market, and the way the CURD program was structured also appeared to expose the OCM's lawsuits. One prominent suit challenged the constitutionality of CURD's original residency requirements, which paused licensing in several parts of the state entirely. And another major lawsuit brought by several disabled military veterans who challenged the OCM's preference for impacted individuals, violated their rights, halted another 400 CURD applicants from proceeding. It would be more than a year before the first marijuana store opened in New York on December 29th of 2022. And by that time, New York City, which has the potential to be one of the world's largest regulated cannabis markets, was rife with illicit marijuana sellers operating with near impunity. The state's cannabis official Exit Alexander is the last is at least the third high-profile state official responsible for New York's marijuana launch to leave. Reuben McDaniel, a former president of a dormitory authority of the state of New York, better known as Danzy, quit his post in June of 2023. The Danzy was tasked with raising a promised $150 million in capital fund that would be made available to CURD applicants. Critics say the Dancy was responsible for finding locations where CURD applicants could open so-called turnkey stores, but largely failed to do so. Several months after McDaniel's departure, Axel Barnaby, the OCM's chief of staff and policy director and a former top official in the Cuomo administration, also left the government's office. Others, such as former state Senator Tremaine Wright, who chairs New York's Cannabis Control Board, CCB, remain in their positions. Some players in the state's marijuana industry question why New York legislature, the CCB, or Hochul herself aren't just as responsible for the dire situation, and they point out that law enforcement and the state marijuana officials claimed they were powerless to do much about the unlicensed competitors, which might number as many as 2,800 in New York City alone, according to a recent estimate. Without new enforcement powers that the state legislature granted only this spring, Alexander, being Hochul's designated fall guy, is the vibe I get the cannabis places, Ordunda said. And in a final quote, here's a guy who was on the forefront of cannabis reform in New York State for a very long time, Ortuna continued. There would be no legal cannabis in New York if it weren't for Chris Alexander to throw the guy out. It's messed up, he says. Well, you guys. What do y'all have to say about all of this going on in New York? That he's the fall guy and shit is just going down, and it's a sad thing to see. But what do y'all?
Shit rolls downhill.
Somebody messed up because
Summer's Proverbs.
Yeah,
right. I mean, didn't they all just screw it all up? And someone's got to go. It's just the way it goes.
It's just the way it goes.
Do we see who the mayor of New York City is and what this guy says? I mean, it's obvious that the politics and the politicians and governor and the governor in New York are all full of the same BS. And I think this is just a classic case of shit rolls downhill, and they need someone to hang this on, and they're going to hang it on the dude's head. However, it's not like it wasn't totally mishandled from the beginning. So part of it is like, maybe this was fumbled, obviously mishandled, but maybe it was fumbled to a point where it was like everything that we know in politics, very nepotistic and very one-sided. And so I can only imagine that this dude basically made his bed, and someone's got to take the dirt now.
That's him. I think he's the fall guy. And he was complicit in all of it.
Where's Chris Webber?
Is he the fall guy, or is he just the guy that goes away because he was the guy that fucked up?
Yeah, I mean,
what happened to Chris Webber and his $50 million?
Well, that was addressed in there. The CURD programmer with Dancy. That was mentioned in
Reuben
the article.
Daniels.
Yeah. Yep, his name was mentioned in the article. Rico.
I know it's so tough all over the place, but especially in these concentrated areas where they're notoriously politically windy. It's hyper corrupt, and there's just it's difficult. I don't think that there's ever going to be necessarily a smooth transition. I think it's just going to have to be like, just as best they can manage it to not be an open air market. But I just don't see it happening.
What's the answer? Purge it all and just start over again?
You can't. The genie's out of the bottle.
I know you can't. Yeah. So what's the solution?
Genie's out, baby.
We talked about this last week, man. You can't say genie's out of the bottle. Genies go back into bottles.
Exactly.
They go back into lamps.
You gotta say there's too much sand. Shovel it back into the ocean, or toothpaste in the tube.
The poop is out the chute. The poop is out the chute.
Hold on, bro. People get their people have their poop pushed in.
Yeah, but it comes right back out.
Oh boy.